We have a very scintillating one-on-one for you this morning with the Jamaican author and environmentalist Diana McCaulay, author of A House for Miss Pauline. Please welcome her. And Diana will be in conversation with the truly indefatigable Cindy Allman, aka Book of Sins. Cindy does, yes, exactly. As I think you all know so much for Caribbean reading and writing, and we are truly blessed to have her. She is a gem to our industry. Let's give it up for Book of Sins, Cindy. That's it from me. Enjoy the readings and conversation.
Good. Okay. Good morning. Is it on? It's on? Okay, we're hearing happy Sunday, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out. We're going to be in conversation with Diana McCaulay, author of A House for Miss Pauline. And when Bocas released their theme for this year, which is Always Coming Home, I'm like, they must have told Diana what the theme was, because this book perfectly encapsulates everything about Always Coming Home. So we're going to start with Diana doing a reading, and then we'll get into questions, into the conversations. It's going to be fun. There's going to be bad words, as Diana says. So we'll start with the reading, and then we'll go to the questions and conversation.
I'm going to do it from here. Is this on? Yes? No? Yes? No? Okay. Good morning, and thank you all for turning out 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Heroic. I'm very happy to be here, thanks to Bocas. When I heard it was Cindy I was going to be in conversation with, I was like, oh God, I have to buy new clothes. Because I'm really a jeans and t-shirt kind of person. So you see these pants here? Is you cause it. Okay, so I'm going to read from the book, from the beginning of the book, A House for Miss Pauline. When Miss Pauline finally comes to understand that the stone walls of her house have begun to move, she knows she will die before her 100th birthday, just over a month away. She sleeps in her mother's iron bed under a light sheet, the mosquito net pulled close, and for the past 7 nights, she has been woken by unfamiliar noises. The first time it happened, she considered getting up to investigate, but the noise stopped. Country night full of sound, she whispered aloud to reassure herself. She is not someone who has struggled to sleep at any point in her life. Not after bereavements, not with newborns, not when her baby father went to build roads for months, or when her boy child came home with torn clothes and swollen eyes. Not when her girl child became a mother and took up with a man she disliked. Never with indecision or worry, sickness or remorse. Not when her monthly stopped coming. Not after the wounds of loss or disaster. Not even when her dreams became the recurring nightmare of an underground cavern below an unreachable hole in the rock, arousing guilt that clung like mortar. Not when she began calling herself old at 80. But night after night she's been roused, first by her body and then by the noises. Her stomach cramps, her fingers ache, she's thirsty. One night, a rustling, easily dismissed as small nocturnal animals outside going about their business. The next, a swishing like a storm through trees, but when she goes to the half-open sash window, the night is windless. On the third night, she hears the scrape of a heavy stone being pulled through pebbly mud, wet and grasping. The fourth brings the rumble of river stones being sieved. The fifth and sixth nights are split by a cracking, like men breaking stone with hammers and pickaxes, men hauling stone, men quarrying. She shudders and fear feathers her skin. She pulls the sheet up, but it presses down on her body, and she thinks of a shroud. Her mouth fills with saliva, and she swallows, reaches for the cup beside her bed, rivers cool water, and she drinks. The noises are not only strange and too close, but they are directed at her, for her. Chaman Pauline, what do you? She demands out loud. How much things make noise at night time? rat, cat, croaking lizard, dog, bat, owl, mongoose in the chicken coop. Top your ass, foolishness. You're in a safe place. But she well knows that dangers hide in safe places. If a man, a thief, is in her house, he'll be sorry. On the 7th night, she gets up and reaches for the last stored under her bed, her knees crackling. She holds one of the bedposts and pulls herself up, thinks of her baby father, Clive, who gave her the cutlass and the leather scabbard made with his own hand. Her son, Alvin, insisted on installing electricity. She's never liked or trusted the wires that run along the walls of her house. Alvin had a banking job in Kingston, and he used to pay her light bill. She's often imagined complaints from his unpleasant town wife about the money he spent on her and what her son might have said in response. If she has light now, I don't feel so guilty for not visiting her in Mason Hall. Alvin, her firstborn. The handle of the lass is smooth against her palm, but heavier than it used to be. It's not heavier, girl. You is weaker. Out loud, she says, weaker is not fucking weak. In the central room of her home, she stands, holding her breath. She fumbles for the switch, annoyed by her sudden reliance on its power. The warm, flickering glow of a kerosene lamp, which can be adjusted depending on her mood, bright for cooking, dim for thinking, is much better. But perhaps the harsh electric light will solve the mystery of the sounds. Wild hog, maybe? Yellow snake? Foolishness. No snake has been seen in Mason Hall in living memory, and feral hogs are rare. She throws a switch and squints until her eyesight adjusts, goes from room to room, cutlass upraised, staring at the underside of the zinc roof, looking behind furniture, curtains, under beds and rugs. Not a lizard, mouse, cockroach, or stray cat. Nothing fallen off a table. Certainly no mongoose, snake, or hog. No thief in man, lying in wait. Just another fucking dream. She turns the light off. Back in her bedroom, she lays one palm on the walls of carved limestone blocks. The stones feel dry, papery, as if they might crumble to dust through her fingers. Her left arm cradles her stomach, trying to soothe it. She fights to swallow. She knows every fault and blemish the stones hold, their fissures and holes and the faint shapes of insects captured by the rock as they died. Then, against her palm, she feels a vibration like an electric shock, snatches her hand away. Is it the damn wires? She's cold, too cold. She reaches out again, this time with her fingertips, and the stones tremble, sending a jolt from her fingers to her chest. She sets her jaw, leaves her fingers where they are, and closes her eyes, thinking of the men who helped to build this house, arguing about whether cement was the right kind of mortar. Then the wall itself shivers like a living thing. Hairs rise on the back of her neck, but she wipes her palms on her nightdress and kisses her teeth, impatient with herself. She stands tall and speaks directly to the walls of her house. Stone is not dog or man. Stone can't move. Her mouth tastes of metal. The cup on her bedside table is empty. She sits in the armchair in the corner of her room, the cutlass on her lap. She'll clean and sharpen it after she's had her tea in the cool of the early hour, and then she'll slide it under her pillow where it will be easy to reach in case she needs it. She thinks of other mornings, the steady rolling days of the life she has built for herself, weeding the kitchen garden at the side, raking up leaves for mulch, tidying her house, fetching water from river for storage in her stone jar, preparing meals, using her own vegetables and seasoning, reading time in the afternoon when it's too hot for exertion, crackers and cocoa tea made from her own plants, enjoyed on the veranda after the sun goes down, and then a welcome retreat to her bed. She's empty with a cavernous loss, hollowed out by a force she doesn't understand, and she waits for dawn, startling when a pair of croaking lizards begin their call and response. The day lightens, and just as her spirits lift, a damp spiral of wind whispers against her face. "Ras," she hisses. Over at the window, again, there is no draft coming from outside. Are the stones themselves breathing out? She smells stagnant water, something wet and rotten, something dead. Tap your blood clot foolishness, he says, glad there's no one to hear her, but the wind still swirls and her voice shakes. Then she speaks her own name. Pauline Evadne Sinclair. If you're going to talk to stone and yourself, talk the truth. You need some help.
A round of applause for Miss Pauline. I love being in Miss Pauline's world, and I love how different she is from my grandmother, because I was like, she and my grandmother would never be friends. The fact that Pauline only knows 2 Bible verses, the fact that she's still cussing down the place, but I love how she's almost 100 years old. She's still going strong, and she's a lot like other grandmothers. They are getting up every single morning at the crack of dawn. There's a cocoa tea. There's them just not resting. So I just want to talk a bit about Miss Pauline and what was it like writing a character like that? Because she's unlike any Jamaican grandmother or Caribbean grandmother I've ever read in literature.
I guess I think, can you hear, is this on? Yeah. I guess I think that I don't so much discover my characters as they discover me. So I'm sort of channeling this woman who actually moved into my head in 2003. So for those authors who say their books have long gestations, I am one such. But the woman who came to me was, in a way, just defies every stereotype of a Jamaican woman. She's profane, she's not religious, she's literate. She claimed literacy for herself. I should say she's a rural woman. She's Jamaica's largest ganja farmer. Her parish's largest ganja farmer, I shall say. So she's uninterested in the rules. And so this was really the woman who revealed herself to me. Someone who I hope many of us have had relationships, very positive relationships, very important relationships with our grandmothers, right? And even if your grandmother is not exactly like this one, I am hoping that the relationship that you had with your grandmothers, you see some seeds of that in Miss Pauline. She's an elder, she's a rural woman, until in the book, when she actually leaves her community, a real place called Mason Hall, she's never left her district. So, I hope that when you meet her, you will find her unforgettable, as I did writing her. I mean, there are some days I sit at my computer, and she would, I know it sounds really dumb to say a character start doing things, right? I mean, it sounds like you're just making it up, but it's sort of true. And I would sit there thinking, you sure you want to go there? And she'd say yes. So.
I love that. I want to talk more about the house. Mini spoiler alert, Miss Pauline basically built her house from a Bakra house. And if you don't know what Bakra is, it's a slave master. So she basically went and took the stones from the old slave master house to build her house. And I was reading it and I'm like, well, Miss Pauline, what you expect, like 100 years down the line, the house is now moving or talking back to you. So I just want to talk about that. Like, why did you decide to have that plot line? Because I find it so very interesting. And then we'll go into the whole issue of land and ownership and colonialism, because that's one of the things that you opened the book with a quote that I found was just so interesting. So let's talk about that house building and Miss Pauline's physical house.
Okay, so I'm somewhat obsessed with the great houses, remnants of the enslavement centuries, and there are discussions going on all over the world about what to do with these places, right? Should they be razed to the ground? These are places where an atrocity took place, genocide, torture, death. Why are they still even living, right? That's one argument. Another argument is there should be monuments, places where you could go in a kind of pilgrimage for grief and regretting, something like the death camps of the Second World War, which I've actually visited as well. And then there's how they're being used today in many cases as a tourism attraction. You go and you have your wedding there, and you have a mento band and a drink with an umbrella in it. And so I'm kind of obsessed with what to do with these stone houses, because they also are often places that are located in extraordinarily beautiful places. I could really, every time I've been to a great house, I've stood there and understood how a man could walk up and say, I'll have this, right? I could just see that person looking out on this valley or this river or this hillside and saying, yeah, this is really great and I'm going to have it. So they are beautiful, and also if they're in good shape, they're examples of extraordinary workmanship and skill, which was built by the people who were enslaved. So this is the labor of our own people. And do we really want that to not exist anymore? So these are debates and questions that are occupying us now in the present moment as Caribbean peoples all over the world, and were occupying me. I will also say that when she moved into my mind, Miss Pauline, in 2003, the reason I remember it is because I was at a writer's workshop. And I was at a writer's workshop at a great house. For the Jamaicans, I'll call the name, Good Hope, right? And I was there by virtue of an old friend giving me a deal on the writer price, because environmental people don't make any money, right? So we're very broke. So I went there, and I was staying in probably the smallest room in the great house. It was under the front steps. And I thought, well, I'd go there at night, very small, nicely fixed up and everything, and I'd wonder, what was this used for, right? Was it a storage room where there are tools and stuff? Or was it a place where...
Diana, you stayed there?
I did. Listen, man, say good that I stayed there.
True.
Or I thought maybe there was a female enslaved woman there, and she was there by virtue of proximity, being very close to the great house and being able to respond to middle of the night requirements. I don't know. Anyway, she moved into my head. And so that is where she moved into my head. So this woman moves into my head. At the time she moves into my head, she's young. By the time she gets written, she's old. And then years later, in my environmental work, I went, a friend who lives in Cockpit Country, which Jamaicans will recognize as a still forested area in the west central interior. He took me to see a great house called Fontabelle Great House, also a real place, that was built over a sinkhole. By then, that great house was in ruins. But yeah, there was the foundations around this sinkhole. And I thought, wow, why did they do that? Was it a toilet? Or were they getting fresh water? And that seemed to me so sort of symbolic of the enslavement centuries. And then even closer to where we are now, I heard a story of a foreigner, a white man, who came and took the stones of Fontabelle Great House to build his own house. And I thought, why a white man? Why not a black woman? And would such a black woman be afraid of the ghosts in those stones, or would she be cloaked in defiance? That is Miss Pauline. She not afraid of no ghost, nor no lizard, nor no rat, nor no thief in man.
Well, Miss Pauline is not me, because I'm afraid of everything. Like, when she was talking back to the house, I'm like, I'm not even talking back. I'm leaving. So when she was having a full conversation, I was like, you're doing too much, Miss Pauline. But she's been around for almost 100 years. You said in your opening, and there was a quote, it says, colonialism is almost always about the land. And you talk about the land a lot in this book. Ownership, who has ownership, who gets to build, who has rights. And I just want to talk a bit more about that, and also because you're an environmentalist, land is something that you think about a lot, and that was just really well done in this book. And I feel like if you're from Caribbean heritage, you know somebody. Land issues is like a daily part of our lives. Like people are fighting over. You said in the book that somebody chop up somebody over land that you can't even grow anything on. It's not even that big. So land is just always such a big thing in Caribbean literature and in Caribbean life. And I love how it was explored in this book. So I just want you to talk a bit more about that.
I want to find you something. And I'm not going to get up this time because it's short. This is Miss Pauline on land. Miss Pauline thinks about the meaning of land. She knows it's not eternal. If it can be owned, it can be stolen or sold, and the new owners can do as they please with it, excavate it down to bedrock and deeper, lay it to waste. Even weather wages war against land. Land can shake and rend and tear itself apart. And once people arrive, land ceases to be itself. It becomes the place where human events unfolded. It becomes its memories, ghosts, and tragedies. Here is where it happened, in this very place. Borders are constructed, naming is done. But she has no sense of herself if she is not grounded. She is as much part of the land as the lowliest worm, the most insignificant pebble. Land give, she thinks, remembering her father's shelter at the top of his sloping, stony ground, where he watched over his crops day and night, catching a few hours of sleep on animal feed bags laid on the dirt. She thinks of the food she grew and her ganja crop, and her father's swollen leg chopped with his own hand, wielding his own tool. Land give, and it take too, she whispers. Land is dangerous. So that's what Miss Pauline thinks about land. I think we actually have to revisit our systems for ownership of land. I tend to think, and this is now the environmental person talking, which is kind of dangerous, you don't want the environmental person to come out, is in a way, in order to own land, you need to sit an exam, right? Because I think you need to not just think about what you are going to do to the land, but what it is asking of you. And land is not just about the people on it, but it's about all the non-human inhabitants as well that we share space with. And I think, in a way, the religious idea of dominion, it has caused us a lot of difficulty because ownership confers upon us the right, this is how we believe now, ownership confers upon us the right to do whatever we feel like with the land, regardless of what it might be asking from us. And I believe there needs to be a real reckoning and real investigation, real thinking, real going to places and just trying to hear what the land is saying to figure out what it is that land is asking from us. I know these are radical ideas. You can imagine me trying to convince a politician or anybody who owns a lot of land, but that's what I think about land. Yeah, I mean, think of the Caribbean. The Taino peoples were here, and then, first the Spanish, in the case of Jamaica, and the English came, and they took everything, and, we've been fighting over land for, I don't know, probably our entire history as human beings, from we crawled out of the primeval ooze. I think it's time to stop.
But then also we read about Miss Pauline. There was one point in the book where her husband is like, we should get married. And she's like, get married? We want a piece of land. Like, land is just so important. And she's like, I don't care about getting married. I just care about building a house. And it goes back to the environment. Like, her first house was demolished because of the hurricane. So she was like, I want something that's going to stand the test of time, and land and house is just something that plays a huge role in all of that. So one thing I want to talk about...
Yeah, but does she want land, or does she want that feeling of safety? Right? Yeah. It's really that feeling of safety and continuation that is what she's after. And of course, in the book, someone else claims the land she's built her house on. So if that's the way if we're going to think that ownership of land is held in might, so the ships and the cannons and the violence, or it's held in a piece of paper, a title, then does she really have that feeling of safety and permanence that she's seeking? Yeah. So sorry to cut you, but ownership it gives you this illusion, is what I'm saying, that this land is now yours and you can do whatever you like to it. That's really an illusion.
Well, I don't own any land, so if anybody wants to give me land,
I'll give you the exam, okay? If you get the land, I'll give you the exam
What's
so
gonna
that
be on
you
the
can be a
exam?
proper steward.
Fair. I want to talk about Miss Pauline, and I feel like as someone that reads a lot of literature, we don't read it from the older person's perspective. I feel a lot of times they're left out, their voices are gone. And why did you write a character that's almost 100 years old? Why wasn't she like 60 or 70? And I also like this end of life kind of thing that she talks about a lot. You would think that she would be surrounded by a community of people. What does her community look like? You would think it's her grandchildren, her children, but that's not the case. So I just want to talk a bit more about that, then I'll open the floor for questions.
So there's another long story about why an elder. But as I get old, right, I kind of feel like, hey, everybody, I'm still here, you know? Because especially for women, I think you go through this. A writer once said the woman has three ages: pre-babe, babe, and post-babe, you know? And so you do get to this stage in life where the world tries to tell you you're less interesting, and I push back on that, right? And I really revere and admire our Caribbean elders, especially the women. And we have some here at this festival that I think are such examples of older women who are feisty, as we say, energetic, still doing their craft, if it's writing or things, still digging yam, as Erna said. Yeah. And so I wanted to breathe life into a character like that. But I also had a great aunt who was born in 1896, and she died when she was 102. And she died when she was 102 because she fell off a ladder on her 100th birthday. Right? So she was hanging curtains, dropped off the ladder, and then broke her hip, and that took her into a downward spiral. But until her 100th birthday, she was completely mobile, active, bright, still enjoying life and all of that, right? So she was an influence on me, and I think it's entirely possible. And we all know really old women in the Caribbean who do, you know, are very active until the end. So I wanted to give voice to my Aunt Sybil in a way. And the other thing I'd say about Aunt Sybil was, well, I knew her pretty well. She came to Kingston from Black River in Jamaica. So that's probably a 2-3 day journey in a horse and buggy, right? And you have to go over this steep hill called Spurtree Hill. Man Bump was called then, still called now. And I thought of my aunt sitting there, my great aunt she was, sitting there in this buggy looking up at this huge mountain that this horse and buggy was going to climb up, and she was going to the bad old city of Kingston and everything. And she lived from buggies and kerosene lamps and river water to me sitting in front of my computer in my house trying to show her how to use a computer. Cell phones, airplanes, the world wars, independence, the whole breadth of the 20th century. And I sort of wanted to write about someone who had seen all of that, but from a small rural village in a small Caribbean island.
And you did it so well, Diana. You did it so well. I'm going to open the floor to questions. Any questions? Okay, we have one person here. Don't be shy, people. We're in book club.
Hi. I'm kind of fascinated by this concept that the character takes, comes into your head. And when you finished writing the book, did she leave?
Oh, no. No, she's right here. And she's waiting to see what kind of questions you'll ask. And, if she don't like them, she's going to get irritated. So, but don't take it personally, okay? No, she hasn't left me. And in fact, there's only the characters in that book that Cindy has here, I think, did not come to me before the writing of the book. All of them came to me before the writing of the book. And she's all the way back in 2003, and she is still there.
Wow, okay, thank you.
Sometimes she make me can't sleep, and I don't like that. So she's sleeping and I'm not sleeping,
I have one other question. Well, it's more like a comment. So I'm fascinated by, land. And of course, a book that really resonated and was like, opening was Braiding Sweetgrass, right? And they talk a lot about asking permission in that book. And it seems so like, of course we should ask this tree permission to cut it down to build a building here and so on. But as you said, like, I think people think it's a romantic idea, but I really see it as like, that's the essence of what we should be doing, and we don't respect the earth enough. But at the same time, as she shows in Braiding Sweetgrass, the land always comes back. Like, as much as we try to destroy it, you know, there's a way, like you see on a pavement in New York, you'll still see a little green thing coming up in the middle of a big city because nature is so resilient. So yeah, I'm fascinated.
I think that's a dangerous idea, though, that no matter what we do, nature will come back. I mean, there will be some form of green thing that survives. And we all, you know, if we live in the Caribbean, we've been through hurricanes, right? And I remember after Hurricane Gilbert in 1988, standing in the hills that overlook Kingston and looking out at the damage and thinking Jamaica is finished. And it wasn't true. You know, 3 months' time, by December came around, if you didn't personally know that there was a big guango tree right over there, you would not necessarily look at the place and think it was devastated. The natural environment came back faster than the human. There were still plenty of houses without roofs and stuff. But at the same time, what I would say is the complexity of what we call nature, of its, and I hate the word resilience, but I will use it, its resilience, the abundance that it gives us, often comes back in a much diminished way. So that diversity of, I never knew what a forest was until I left Jamaica. And I'm somebody that, when I was younger, outside a lot, right? And it wasn't until I went to the Pacific Northwest for study, and they took me into an old-growth forest, that I was like, geez, this is a different thing, because it was not just a row of trees, it was not one species of trees, and there were all these other, you know, mosses and animals and all manner of things. And I realized in my home, I had never seen an undisturbed forest. So we can plant back trees, and they have done it in the Pacific Northwest, but we will have lost that old community of plants and animals. And I think that is, you know, a tragedy. And we've lost so much already. We should have a position that if it's old growth forest, not one more branch is to fall. And somebody got me on the environment. Very sorry. I apologize.
Any more questions? Oh, we have one at the back.
Hi, good morning. Not a question, actually a comment. I am a third-generation farmer. I grew up with my great-great-aunt as a grandmother. She was born in 1923. Wow. We grew up in Blanchisseuse, so behind our house is pure forest. And I see so much of her in Miss Pauline as someone who just went her own path. She grew up in Tobago, came to Trinidad, married a Venezuelan fisherman, and he told her, you can't do certain things, and she decided no. While he's not home, she's going to farm, she's going to make her own money. She started a shop, she built the church, the community center. She was such a leader in our community, and she was always looking to give back in some way. Her door was always open, and this has made me so happy to see the similarities. As someone with a degree in marine biology, I understand your environmental standpoint. I've seen a lot of different species on our property. Some are endangered, and we always try to protect them. I've always pushed not using a lot of chemicals and trying to rotate the crops and integrate, so not just clear the entire land just for planting. So you've made me very happy this morning. I'm really happy to have gotten up and come here.
And you know, I feel our elders, our women, they are so rarely celebrated. You know, they're not in our history books, and the newspaper don't write story about them. And yet, I think if you went around this room, you probably find so many people have that in their background and life. And a little bit on farming, I don't stand in the place that there's to be no farming, right? I love food, and I do eat food. But and on the question of asking the land permission, it's more about realizing, I think, what's actually in front of you, about having a spirit of inquiry, to say, all right, well, this is some kind of tree, I've never seen it before. Let us start with what is the name of the tree. Can I even identify it? Which organisms live in that tree? What functions does it serve? And then try to say, all right, well, I want to grow yam or whatever it is we want to grow, and how can I do that? How can I use this land to provide abundance for me and also for its other inhabitants? I see in my garden, I have a little tiny garden at home, right? And the slugs are always eating it. And I'm trying to decide that the slugs are okay. Now, truthfully, they're very hard to love, right? It's a slug. It's kind of very, very hard to love. And you go and you buy some plant and it costs a whole heap of money, and then 2 nights later, I'm off, right? But I'm trying to regard my garden as a habitat, as opposed to a garden. And I'm trying to let a habitat, a place where other organisms live, not just me, but I live there too, right? So I'm trying to, okay, I can't really see you, okay? So if you're all asleep, I don't know, which is good. So I'm trying to regard my garden as a habitat, and I live there as well, and there are things I find beautiful and desirable, but I'm also willing to share them with the slugs and the snails and the other things that I'm not so madly keen on, right? So, and I can't tell you that it's easy. It's not. Sometimes I come out in the morning and think, damn it, the thing gone again. But it's a lesson I'm trying to learn. And that's one thing, one way I think we should look at land. First of all, in the spirit of inquiry, and then secondly, to understand there are other organisms present. It's not just us.
And Diana just gave us the answers to the questions if you want to own land. So I would pass. Diana, Miss
Come and find it, Make sure you put it on Instagram so I know, say, Cindy get land so I can come and make sure.
In the book, Miss Pauline is a ganja farmer, was one of the biggest ganja farmers. And I find in reading this book, you are very detailed on how to grow ganja. So when I do get my lawn, you can also use it as a manual. Whoever is thinking about growing ganja, this doubles as a manual. But I want to know, what was the research that went into that? Because I was reading it and I'm like, it's so much things for grow ganja.
Well, I'm not going to let out my young relatives. But I did speak to family members who are young. Some of them now, growing ganja under permits, right? Because now you're allowed
under permits, everyone.
Yes, under permit, yes. I'm not saying that they weren't doing anything. Anyway, we're moving on. But I also reached out to older people who grew ganja when the soldiers would come in and burn everything down. And I will say in my environmental life, see, I can't help it, but it's relevant. I would going out to, in whatever environmental thing I was doing, I would come across villages, very small settlements in Jamaica, where the entire village had been sustained by ganja. Not a child went to school, not a building built. Absolutely everything that was in that village came from ganja. And we like to pretend that there are certain bedrock things in our societies that are not actually happening, right? We don't want to really think that. I mean, if there was, maybe I got criticism for that back home, eh? So that was one thing. So I also reached out to some older people who, when they did it, Miss Pauline says, ganja bring dying, but hunger bring starving, And I remember one man who was an older Rastafarian, and he was quite hard for me to understand because his Rastafari speech was very complex and stuff. But he said one thing to me. He said, "Weed is ganja," and asked him to say it more slowly. And I realized what he was saying was from God. Yeah. So, and Miss Pauline, she tries to grow yam first, right? Yeah. And the yam take too long, and it rain at the wrong time, and she doesn't know enough. She plant it at the wrong time of year, and she needs something that grows faster and will bring her money for food for her children. And so she sets out to learn how, and does.
I love that. I love that. Any more questions from the audience?
The concept of her going up against someone with a title by just paying taxes, I didn't get that.
Say again?
The concept of her going up against the guy, Turner, I think. I forgot his name. Anyway. Right, based on just her paying the property tax or whatever. Like, he has a title though, so how does that work?
Right. So this is one of the complexities of land ownership, right? So you know, if you have been on land for a certain period of time, you can claim what is called adverse possession. No, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not giving legal advice to anybody. But
everybody's writing it down.
Yeah. But if you can show that you have undisturbed occupation of land, it does give you some legal rights to land. And one of the ways that you can establish you have been there is to have paid the taxes. So if it had, there are these kinds of land disputes going on all over the Caribbean, where there's, for instance, family land that was left to descendants, but probably not in a formal title, but perhaps in an informal community title or just word of mouth. And there are people who have lived on it. There are people who are buried there. And if there's a debate between someone who has a legal title, because the legal titling system has not taken into account these other ways people come to be on land and in my mind, to own land, then it goes to a legal battle, right? And the courts are going to, in all likelihood, had this dispute in this book gone to court, the courts are in all likelihood going to side with the person with the legal title. But if Miss Pauline was standing up in front of that judge to say she has been there since time immemorial, right? And her relatives have been there since slavery time, and she has been paying the property taxes for 10 years, 15 years, whatever it was, and this man just fly in, and him don't pay no property tax, and him don't live on the land, and him don't know north from south or east from west, she does have an argument to make before a judge. Whether she'd be successful is a whole nother question. Book 2.
Okay, so we're getting legal advice. One, we know we know how to plant weed, and once we sit the exam for land, we are in the dance. It's a collective community. I want to talk about community in this book because I think you did it so well, Diana. From the young guy that Miss Pauline meets, and he becomes a part of her community, the community of Mason Hall in general, how we see it changing to what it is now, her small community of friends and all of that. So I just want to talk about how that was explored, especially because as an older woman, she's almost 100 years old. She talks a lot about being alone and loneliness, and those are themes that I really am interested in, especially for an older woman. So can you just walk me through that?
Right. So I think one of the inescapable things about really long life is you do end up by yourself, right? The people you have known have died before you. And, the community that you had as a young person has, especially, again, in the Caribbean context, moved away, gone to Kingston, whatever. So you're left, I think, as you get older, with yourself. And perhaps that is a lifelong journey of finding out who you are and, being willing to be by yourself. But what I wanted to say with the character of Lamont, and you didn't ask me how him moved into my head too, because him did move into my head as well.
I love Lamont.
Yes. So, a politician in Jamaica famously said that there were a group of young men who were irredeemable back in the day. And it bothered me at the time, because I don't really believe in irredeemable anybody or anything, And so when Mr. Lamont moved into my head, I thought, maybe it is still true that at every stage of life, there are meaningful relationships to be made. even with people with whom we share absolutely nothing. We didn't go to school with them, we didn't grow up with them, maybe they don't come from the same place, they're different socioeconomic background, they're different sex, they're different age in the case of Lamont. But surely it is possible for us to forge relationships at every stage of life. And that's really what I was getting at with Lamont. I wanted him to, you look at him and you think he's probably in the posse of the irredeemable, but he really wasn't. And I hope that for those of you who have read the book and those of you who will, that you will find the friendship that develops between them to be very moving and a sort of, I guess, an example for how to navigate those lonely older years. You know, young people need our help, you know, for people in this room who are not young themselves. They need our help and they need guidance that nowadays it seems to me there's so much coming at them from other sources like social media and whatever that the elders are needed more than ever.
I agree. I really did love that friendship. Again, Diana, you explore so much that I don't read about in usual Caribbean fiction, and I think that's what I love. Like a 100-year-old being friends with a 20-year-old. Like, what do they have in common? He's teaching her how to use a phone, and there's just so many things that is in this book that I think everyone should read. Mini plug is the Book of Sins book club pick for me, so you have enough time to go and buy a copy and get it signed and come to book club. Diana, both of your books, Daylight Comment, this one, climate change, the environment is a big part. I feel like you cannot separate the environmentalist from the writer, which is good because I feel like every time I pick up one of your books, I'm learning something new. And I just want to talk a bit more about climate change in this book and why. I mean, there's no why. It's part of how you write, but explore that a bit.
I mean, Daylight Come was an overtly environmental book set in the future where it's become too hot to go outside during the day in a fictional Caribbean island. So this one is probably the only one of my books that has a straight-up environmental message. But I am well aware that the soapbox, which you've kind of heard me on a little bit today, is death to fiction, right? And I actually my editors have to rein me in. They have to go through my books and say, listen, this is Diana on page 43, come out. But what I do want to do, and hopefully have done in my books, is celebrate the places where they are set. I want to do honor to the places where they are set, and if those places are under threat, which mostly they are, I want to, with a light touch though, point this out. You know, so even Miss Pauline notices it's hotter, and she notices the river is looking dirty, or whatever language she would use. You know, and I hope that if you were to read all of them, you would see that. You would see this real strong grounding in place. Even the first one, Dog Heart, is set in Kingston, so it is in no sense any kind of bucolic country setting, but there's still an environment there. You know, and there's still the mountains, the rivers, the temperature, and so forth. And I hope that's what you'll find in my books, a more subtle, a more subversive, perhaps, message about the value of the place in which we live. You hear all the time at home, oh, we love Jamaica. Jamaica is the most beautiful place in the world, right? People say it like a mantra. But actually, we don't behave like that. And the way we treat it is as if it's a place that we really, really hate. So that's really what I want to get at. I don't want to have an overt environmental message because we're not going to stop read. But I want the places where the book unfolds. I want you to come away from reading to think, I know this place, that wherever the book has been set. Mason Hall, as I say, in the back of the book there is an author's note about even more stuff about how this book came to be. And Mason Hall is a real place. It is where one of my ancestors came to in Jamaica. And when I found out about this ancestor, I as somebody who thinks I know Jamaica really, really well, I'd never heard of Mason Hall. And so that in itself was a kind of eye-opening thing. You know, you can think you know the place well, but really it always surprises you. And so I tooled off to Mason Hall, again in one of these surprises that is just what I love about Caribbean living, is I discovered somebody I knew, who I knew I had known him for years and years and years. And finally one day I said to him, "Danny, where are you from?" And he said, "Mason Hall." And all the years I had known him, I never asked him where he was from. I knew where he was currently, but I had never asked him where he was born. And so I went there and met him and saw the place where one of my ancestors came to first. So that too was also behind the book, and I think somebody's
We have one more question. Anybody want to ask a question? Okay, I'll ask the last question. Diana, where is home for you?
Oh, definitely Jamaica. No, that is a real. I'm so not home anywhere else that it's. I won't say I haven't tried, right? I'm much married. Husband number 3 is in the back.
Hey, third time's a charm.
and Kelly has him on. And Kelly has him on a list of supportive spouses. He's vying for top link. And so one of my earlier husbands, Dick Reed, as men did back in the day, that we were migrating, right? And we went to Canada, Toronto, and we lasted 3 weeks. And I mean, I think it's the shortest migration on record, right? And when we landed back at Palisados Airport, and we were driving in, and we hit a pothole, and I said, "Stop. I want to get out of this car, and I want to really look at that pothole," right? So, and then I went to school, went to college much later. I've lived my whole life back ways, right? So I was there in Seattle in the Pacific Northwest for 2 years. And I really loved Seattle, and there were much about it I liked. It had water like home, it had mountains like home, but it just simply wasn't home. And Anthony Winkler, I think he said it right. He said, "Home is the place that smells right, tastes right, sounds right, feels right, that you understand, and to only some degree understands you." You know, this feeling of being among my people. Come in here, right? We're on the Caribbean Airlines plane, and it lands, bounce up, boof, bounce up. So there's plenty, "Oh my God," and screaming and stuff in the thing. And then when it rolls to a stop, one of the flight attendants asks for some applause for a gymnastics team that's on the plane, right? And everybody bawl out and clap and everything. My people.
I love that. Diana, thank you so much for writing an amazing book, A House for Miss Pauline. She's a character that I just cannot shake. And if you haven't already done so, the books are at Paperbase. Go and grab a copy, get her to sign, and also read Daylight Come, because honestly, climate change is a thing. And see you at book club in May. And you can ask all your questions to Diana again, because she's coming. But thank you so much, Bookus, for having us.